Hello, welcome to my channel. If you're new here, hi, my name is Melleny. If you'd like to get to know me a little bit better, all my social media links will be linked down below in the description box, so be sure to check that out if you're interested in any kind of a way. I just want to quickly remind you down below in the description bar, there will also be links to a Black Lives Matter resource where you can sign petitions, donate, and educate yourself on the matter. I'll also have linked down below the link to the Blackout Buddy Read, which is created by Books with Shay, who I'll also have linked if you're also interested in educating yourself further. But yeah, I think without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into my June wrap-up. June was by far probably one of the worst months during this quarantine period. I read none of the books that were actually on my TBR, and the books that I did read were kind of average. It was just overall a bad reading month, which was really weird for me. I don't know how I feel about it. I definitely think that a part of it was because I was writing exams, and all 4 of my exams ended up being 3 days long, which basically meant that half of my week I spent writing exams, stressing about exams, doing anything and everything revolving around my stupid exams. So you know what, it's been some time, but I figured, you know what, I might as well still do the wrap up and talk about the books that I have read. I'll also have linked up in the info cards a place where you can find my June TBR if you're interested in seeing what I actually had planned to read this month, and which I really failed at getting at. So I think without further ado, let's go ahead and jump into the video. The first book that I read this month was Lady Smoke by Lara Sebastian. It was one of my favorite reads, if not the only 5-star read on my list for the month of June. I really love this. This was such a fantastic sequel. This is a little bit more political heavy, and we did have some romance smished in, but a lot of this book takes place in 3 settings, and each and every setting had a lot of political angst. So if you're someone who really likes the fantasy books to have these amazing political systems and plotting and theories and stuff revolving around politics and kingdoms, then this is the one for you. It's not necessarily like an action heavy. That's not to say that this book doesn't have action. It's a little bit more theoretical when it comes down to things. I then listened to Dance of Thieves by Mary E. Pearson. This is the sequel series to the Remnant Chronicles, which I love. An entire series for me was incredible, at least 4.5 stars and above. This I liked, but I did feel a little bit disconnected from the characters in this one. I like the fact that this is set 6 years after the ending of the Remnant Chronicles, because, you know, we can now kind of see how things have changed. Has it changed for the better? Has it changed for the worse? I also like the fact that we kind of were introduced to a new world, in the sense that this is a place that a lot of the kingdoms that we met in the Remnant Chronicles didn't know existed, or didn't care enough to know that it existed. So it was quite interesting. I really like the romance aspect, but for me, one of the things I didn't enjoy was how fast the ending just happened. Like, so much could have changed if there was just a little bit more communication. Sometimes I don't mind that the main characters / love interests don't communicate, but with this one, it just seems silly by the fact that they weren't communicating about anything. I did like, though, the connection that they connected through a really, really weird way. The beginning of the book started off so strong, and the ending just wasn't as fulfilling. I gave this 4 stars. I then decided to give Frostheart by Jamie Littler another chance, because I read this back in December and I could not get into it. It was just, I don't know, it just got really long and lengthy, and I was just like, oh, can this end? So I reread it, and my feeling still stands. I think that this book is slightly too long for what it intends, but I did like the way it ended. Will I continue on with the series? Probably. It did end on a high note, and a note that I was like, this is kind of interesting. I'm intrigued to see how this moves forward. I also loved the illustrations throughout the book. I just found that it was a little bit too wordy, and I was just like uninterested, especially towards the middle. The middle just seemed so chunky and unnecessary, but the beginning and the end were quite strong factors. I ended up giving this 3 stars. I then had the pleasure of reading Die Mauer by Max Anders. This is my German setbook book that I had for the second block of my first semester, and I did not like this at all. This was a lot easier to read than Moringa. Moringa I just straight up could not get into, but this was a little bit easier, and a lot easier to read and get into. But I felt like this is such a foreigner's view of South Africa. Max Anders in this book is representing South Africa to Europeans, because it's obviously, the book is written in German. It was only released in English last year, so for a good 4 years this book was in German and meant for German audiences. And the way that he paints South Africa, even as a 2016 or whenever this book was set, was not great. He made South Africa seem a lot worse than what it is, and I don't know, they kind of made me really upset, so I ended up giving this 2 stars. I then listened to All Boys on Blue by George M. Johnson, which I absolutely loved. I gave this book also 5 stars, so I guess Lady Smoke was not the only 5-star I read. But this book was amazing. It had points where I found were accessible and other points where I learned so much. Johnson kind of goes to the point in saying that there is not a lot of information about queer encounters. How do you go about interacting with someone who you like, and kind of sexual experiences and stuff like that revolving around queer sexual experiences. And it was so enlightening because there is so much information about heterosexual interactions but not a lot about queer sexual interaction. This book was so important, and I highly recommend that you pick it up if you haven't at the moment. It is beyond amazing. It's just such a great book. I highly recommend it. I then listened to The Bear. I like this, but I think it's one of those books that I will enjoy a lot more if I read it. It is quite short. I think the audiobook was like 5 hours long. It was ridiculously short. As I said, like a lot of the information kind of just went over my head because I was listening to it instead of reading it. The way it's written definitely lends itself more to the written format, but overall I still really liked it. I am, as I said, intrigued in getting a physical copy of this. I think it will be a really great story to read. I gave this book 3 stars. I then read What Unbreakable Looks Like. This book revolved around the main character who was part of a human trafficking ring, was sold by her pimp to people for sexual pleasure, and it was haunting and it was just incredible. The book takes place more after the effects, and I mean after she has been saved from this human trafficking circle and put back into what would be normal life. And we kind of see she goes to a rehabilitation center, and then she kind of has to start living her life as what people would consider normal, and just seeing how she is learning to trust and kind of how her trauma has impacted her because she was sexually abused. This book is definitely difficult to read. I would recommend that if you are interested, definitely have a look at the trigger warnings. The author does put trigger warnings in the dedication of the book, so I would definitely have a look at that, because at some moments I just couldn't read the book anymore. It was devastating. I then picked up House of Earth and Blood by Sarah J Maas, the first book obviously in the Crescent City series. I liked this. I gave this 4 stars. I think that in comparison to all of her other books, this was not her strongest one, but I do think this was a great leap into adult fantasy, especially urban fantasy, which was something completely different from what she's written before, because both the Throne of Glass and the ACOTAR series is set in this medieval-like fantasy setting. So for her to kind of base a book in a world similar to our own, but with a lot of magical elements, was so intriguing. I really liked it. I did find that I wasn't really that emotionally attached to some of the characters in the beginning. I feel like this book was quite lengthy, and I feel like that also impacted my opinion on this. If this was a little bit shorter, I think I might have loved it a bit more, but that's like all speculative, like I'm guessing I would. But overall, not a bad read. It was a great start to a series. I'm intrigued to see how things develop from this point, because there were a lot of reveals that happened right at the end of the book. Some you could guess, others not necessarily so. I really liked it. I definitely think I'm going to continue on with the series. And then for my book club, which I'll have linked down below in the description as well, called Topping the TBR, we chose to read Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe, as well as Children of Blood and Bone. I read Aristotle and Dante Discover the Secrets of the Universe, and I really enjoyed it. I thought it was really great. I did find that even though I flew through it, I can't necessarily say much about it. I think the book has a really important message about finding your preference, and I think that this book was really great at exploring that. It does talk about discovering your sexuality, and I think this book is so important in that aspect. And I think this book was really important because this was published back in 2012, and it opened so many doors for literature that we have today. And I think that this book is important in that aspect. I just wasn't necessarily fully connected to the characters. I did give this 3 stars though. And then finally, after like a million books that were not on my TBR, picked up Red Queen, which was on my TBR. This is by Victoria Aveyard. This is a very classic 2015 fantasy YA novel. That being said, I really liked this. I gave this 4 stars. It was a fun, easygoing read. Like, I flew through this when I was reading it. I just really enjoyed my time. I am intrigued to continue on with the series, although I don't exactly know when that will be. but I will continue on with the series at some point. And the last book that I read this month was The Starless Sea by Erin Morgenstern. This is a book that I'd previously given 3 stars to because I wasn't quite sure how I felt about it. Like, I liked certain points, but I didn't like others. And I figured, you know what, I'd probably have a lot more concrete feelings if I read this physically, which is exactly what I finally did. I have sticky tabbed it and everything. I personally think that this book is very character driven. Like, the plot doesn't really make sense in the grand scheme of things. It's kind of anticlimactic, and I don't know, I feel like Erin Morgenstern was just trying to do way too much in such a short amount of time, and I did find that I wanted the ending to be a bit more conclusive. But the characters were such a driving force in this book. I loved Zachary, I loved Dorian, I loved Maribel, I loved the Keeper. I just love them all so much. Even like the little short stories that are like sprinkled throughout the book were just so incredible. I really loved a couple of them, and I just had a ball with this. Like, all things considered, I really enjoyed it. So I gave it 4 stars, even though the plot was disappointing to say the least. One of the other books that I read this month, which was for my English course, was Things Fall Apart by Chinua Achebe. This was quite an interesting book. I think in a response, like in an academic way, as a response to a book like Heart of Darkness, this does an incredible job. I just found that the writing wasn't as lulling and as like hypnotic as Achebe's academic writing, which I loved. I devoured his academic writing on Heart of Darkness. I just loved it. And then when I got to this book, I was kind of saddened, I guess, that I didn't see the same kind of feeling in the writing. But the story is so important because it definitely gives a different perspective to a novel like Heart of Darkness, and it is such an important book. If you haven't picked it up yet, you definitely should. It's one of those classics that you should pick it up. Even though I didn't necessarily love it, I definitely think it's something that should be read. I gave this like 3 stars. It was okay. It had its point. It was what it was. It's not my favorite classic out there, although not many classics are my favorites. It did what it did. These are all the books that I read in June. Thank you so very much for watching today's video. I hope that you enjoyed it. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. And if you like my face, please go ahead and subscribe. I will then see you in the next video.